I remember the lake before I ever knew how quiet fear could feel. The water was black and still, swallowing the moonlight like it had secrets to hide. Fog rolled low, threading through the trees and curling over the wooden pier, soft as smoke, heavy as a sigh. Somewhere far in the forest, a branch snapped, and I thought it was the wind, until silence returned, too complete, too deliberate. My lantern flickered, spilling pale light on the rocks slick with moss. The air smelled of damp earth and something faintly metallic, a hint that the lake had been waiting for me. And then, just as I leaned closer to peer into the water, I saw it, a shadow gliding beneath the surface, smooth and purposeful, like it knew I was watching. My chest tightened, and I told myself it was only a fish, only the fog playing tricks. But the reflection that returned my gaze, it wasn't mine. That's when I saw it. And I knew the lake held memories older than I could imagine. And some of them were not meant to be disturbed. The lake lay still. Fog curled over the water like pale fingers. I could feel it settling on my skin, damp, cold. The oars barely moved. Every stroke made a whispering splash, soft, deliberate. The air smelled of wet earth and pine. Dusk hung low, heavy in the trees. Shadows stretched across the water, breaking and folding into themselves. I cast my line. The ripple came slowly. Too deliberate for the wind. It slid across the surface, widening, curling back toward me. I squinted, trying to make sense of it. A reflection shimmered, but it wasn't mine. Beneath the surface, shapes moved. Quick flashes of dark, unformed things. They shifted, collapsed, then rose again. The forest was silent. No birds, no rustle of leaves. Only the soft hum of the water around the boat. I breathed too loud. It made the fog tremble, or maybe it trembled on its own. Every exhale tasted of damp moss and cold stone. A shadow brushed past the edge of the boat. Not solid. Not fluid, just there. I reached for the line, but it felt heavier. Something tugged against it, slow, patient. I couldn't see, but I felt it, watching. The reflection in the lake twisted. My face melted into something unfamiliar. Eyes too wide, mouth too small, a shiver ran up my spine. The air pressed closer, tight around my chest. I wanted to look away. Something skimmed under the water again. Not a fish. Not a ripple from the wind. Something alive, waiting. The fog thickened. It swallowed the boat, the lake, the trees. I could barely see my own hands in the pale light. I thought I heard footsteps. Soft, dragging, then gone. The kind of sound that leaves its echo on your skin. The line twitched again. I froze. Even the water held its breath, my reflection stilled. But the shapes beneath did not. They wriggled and pulsed, slow and deliberate, like something learning to move. The silence pressed in. I listened to my own heartbeat loud against the calm. Each beat was a drum in the fog, each breath a whisper I could not stop. The ripple returned. Closer now, insistent. It wasn't just water moving, it was thinking. A cold wind slid over the lake. It smelled faintly of iron, and of something else older, darker. I wanted to pull the line back, but my hands were heavy, as if the fog itself had rooted them to the oars. The ripple widened. A shape broke the surface for a moment. I blinked, unsure if I had imagined it. Pale, almost human, but wrong. The line went slack. Then it tightened again, gentle, teasing. A breath against the water. The forest remained still. Not a leaf moved. Not a bird dared call. I sat, waiting. The ripple circled once more. Slow, deliberate. The water reflected nothing. Not my face. Not the sky. Just a pale gray nothing that seemed to watch me back. I could hear my own heartbeat, and underneath it something else. A soft, patient rhythm. The fog began to lift slightly, but the lake stayed quiet. The ripple lingered. I didn't move. I didn't dare. I only watched, and somewhere beneath I felt it shift again, waiting, breathing. I did not know what it wanted, but I knew one thing. I was not alone. The grove waited. Willows bent, swaying gently, though the air did not move. Their long fingers brushed the fog, dragging it low over the ground. I stepped carefully, boots pressing into damp earth. Every footfall echoed unnaturally loud. It sounded like a second presence walking just behind me. The fog smelled faintly of wet leaves and something older, decaying. I shivered. letting the cold creep along my arms. Branches tickled my cheeks. Whispers drifted between the trees, soft, curling, almost like words. Sometimes a sound that hinted at my name, but never quite formed it. I tilted my head, straining to listen. The whispers slipped away when I focused. Yet they lingered, wrapping around me, just out of reach. Shadows twisted behind the willows. Not trees, not roots. Something darker moving against the pale light. I blinked. They vanished. Each step felt heavier than the last. The ground hummed under my boots, faintly vibrating with the fog. Every movement mirrored somewhere else, though I saw no one. A cold breeze curled around my neck, though the air was still. It carried a hint of iron and soil. The smell rooted me, reluctant to move. The whispers returned, threading through the fog again. Closer now. Not quite voices, more like breath sliding along the bark. I kept walking. Saw footsteps echoed behind me, though I saw nothing. I turned slowly. The grove looked the same. The willows leaned inward. Their leaves brushed against my shoulders like gentle hands. The fog thickened around me, pressing against my chest. I tried to follow a path. It looped strangely, curling under branches. The ground seemed familiar, though I had never been here before. A shadow passed at the edge of my vision. I froze, heart thudding, breath shallow. It didn't move like a person. I breathed again. The whispers hesitated, then returned, soft, insistent, always just behind the rim of my hearing. The fog clung to my boots. It tasted faintly of moss and wet stone. My hands felt damp, sticky with the cold air. I walked in circles. Every turn brought me back to the same pale, trembling willows. The grove did not change. The shadows stretched and twisted. Some seemed to hover between branches. Some lingered at the edges of the fog. I felt eyes on me. Not human, not animal. Just waiting, patient, unseen. The whispers grew faintly urgent. I thought I recognized syllables, almost a name. But when I paused to listen, they dissolved again. Branches scratched my face as I pushed through. The fog swallowed the sound of my own steps. I was alone, yet not alone. The earth hummed faintly beneath me, soft, vibrating, like it remembered each step I took, like it wanted me to take the same one again. I paused at a small clearing. The light from the overcast sky was pale, almost sickly. Shadows pooled in the corners, dark and patient. I looked back. The path I thought I had taken was gone. The same trees loomed, the same fog curling around their roots. I walked again. The whispers trailed just beyond hearing. Branches brushed my arms, leaves wet with dew. The forest held its breath. Each exhale I took echoed in the stillness. The grove did not let go. I stopped, finally. The pale light pressed against my skin. The whispers drifted around me, faint, curling into silence. And then I noticed. I had been walking in circles. The forest, unchanged. It was keeping me here. Patient. Silent. Waiting for me to wander again. The lake was darker than I remembered. Mist clung to my skin, cold and damp, curling into the hollow of my neck. Each breath tasted of wet earth and something faintly metallic. A light appeared. Soft, pale, hovering above the water. It moved slowly, deliberate, almost breathing. I followed. The oars pressed through the fog with quiet resistance. The water lapped gently at the hull, though the lake seemed still. Shapes shifted beneath the surface. Flickers of dark forms, unformed, twisting and dissolving before I could name them. Each ripple reflected the lantern, doubled, multiplied. The lantern hummed faintly, a vibration that settled into my bones. It felt alive, patient, watching. The fog thickened, curling around my shoulders. I could hear the brush of water along the boat, my own heartbeat loud against the quiet. Each breath trembled in the air, mingling with the hum. I reached toward the light. The mist kissed my fingertips, damp and cold. The lantern drifted just beyond reach, teasing, pulsing softly. Shadows moved beneath it. Not fish, not plant, just shapes that quivered and vanished. The hum grew slightly louder, insistent. It was a breathing sound, slow, rhythmic, alive. I leaned closer. The air smelled faintly of smoke and wet stone. The fog swirled around my face, hiding the edges of the world. My reflection in the water wavered. The lantern glowed in it, brighter, colder than the reality above. I could see shapes moving behind it just under the surface, but only fleetingly. I pushed forward. The boat sliced silently through the mist. Each movement echoed, stretched, and vanished. The lantern moved closer, almost floating toward me, almost welcoming. Its hum reached into my chest, soft but commanding. I stretched my hand again. The mist wrapped my fingers like silk. I could feel the cold pulse of the water through the thin wood of the boat. And then it vanished. The light went out. The hum disappeared. The fog remained. The lake lay flat, dark, silent. Not a ripple, not a shadow, not a breath. I drifted, suspended in quiet. The smell of wet pine lingered, faintly sweet, faintly decaying. The air pressed gently against my skin, expectant. Shapes moved beneath me still, but slower now, fainter, like a memory just out of reach. I could not see them clearly, could not name them. I exhaled. The boat rocked slightly. I shivered, feeling the cold hum in my chest, the absence of the light. The lake seemed endless. No shore, no trees, no stars. Just water, fog, and the memory of a lantern that had been alive. I sat, listening to nothing, feeling everything. The silence hummed beneath my skin, steady, patient. The fog shifted again. It clung, it breathed, it waited, and I was alone, yet not alone. The hum lingered in my chest, soft, distant, gone, and still, somewhere below, shapes stirred. I did not move. I could not move. I only watched the water, pale and empty, wondering what had floated and what had left. The fog pressed against my chest. Cold and thick, it wrapped around my shoulders like a living thing. Each breath tasted of damp earth and something faintly metallic. The lake lay still, yet every movement felt exaggerated. My footsteps echoed, bouncing unnaturally off the water. I could hear my own heartbeat, loud and insistent, beneath the hum of the mist. Distant laughter threaded through the fog. Soft, curling, playful, and wrong. I was alone. The trees twisted around the shoreline. Branches bent in impossible angles, reaching toward me. Shadows stretched across the water, dark and patient. I caught a glimpse of a face in the mist. Pale, fleeting, unformed. I blinked. It was gone. A shiver crawled down my spine. The fog carried whispers, faint and twisting. I felt them press against my ears, brushing past my neck. The water rippled slightly, though no wind moved. Dark shapes slid beneath the surface, fleeting and slow. I could feel them, watching, waiting, beneath the pale haze. My breath came faster, shallow, misting in front of my face. Each inhale carried the scent of wet moss, the faint tang of decay. The fog thickened with every step. The laughter returned. Not from behind me, not from the side. It seemed to come from everywhere, folding into itself. The shadows of the trees shifted. Claws of darkness stretched over the water. They flickered like broken reflections, never still. Faces appeared again, pale, blurred, sometimes smiling, sometimes twisted. Each vanished when I blinked or turned my head. I felt the echo of my own footsteps stretch and fracture. The water hummed faintly beneath the fog. The silence between echoes felt heavier than the sound. I tried to move closer to the shoreline. Branches clawed at my coat and hair. The mist settled around me, sticky and cold. Another face hovered for a second, barely there. Eyes too wide, mouth too small. Then gone, I heard my name whispered. Soft, urgent, almost familiar. The sound disappeared before I could respond. The fog wrapped me completely. It pressed into my ears, my eyes, my skin. Every shadow seemed to breathe. I stopped. The echoes bounced one last time across the lake. The laughter faded, leaving only a low, patient hum beneath the water. The forest held me in place, unmoving, silent. And yet, I felt watched. The faces did not return. But the shadows lingered, stretching over the water like dark ink. The fog trembled lightly, as if breathing. I exhaled slowly. The mist curled around me, soft, clinging. The lake reflected nothing but pale light. I stayed there, alone yet never alone. The fog waited. The far shore lay hidden beneath fog. The water was glassy, still, smelling faintly of wet wood and cold stone. Each breath hung heavy in the air, mingling with mist, An old boat drifted there. Its paint was faded, peeling, slick with water. The oars swayed gently, rocking the hull. A silhouette appeared. A fisherman, hunched, casting a line that never landed. The hum of the lake seemed to pause around him. I froze. He turned toward me slowly, faceless, silent. The line dangled, suspended in air. Ripples radiated outward from the boat, small, circular, deliberate. The water smelled faintly of iron, or perhaps blood. I took a step closer. The mist brushed my cheeks, damp and cold. My boots pressed into soft mud that sucked lightly at my soles. The oar scraped the water, a thin, glassy sound sharp against the fog. It echoed strangely, stretching, bending, as if the lake itself were listening. I reached for my own oars. Each movement felt heavier than the last. The lake hummed faintly beneath me, a slow, low vibration that settled into my chest. The fisherman raised his arm again, casting the line. It never moved beyond the water's surface. The ripple stayed suspended, as if waiting. I rowed closer. The fog wrapped around the boat, thick and clinging. My hands were cold, wet, trembling slightly. He did not speak. He did not blink. Faceless, patient, unmoving, the ripples spread, following his shape. They lingered longer than they should, folding over themselves. I felt the echoes of something old, waiting, beneath the water. Closer now. I could see the faint texture of his coat, soaked, stiff with age. The smell of wet wood clung to him, faintly sour, faintly decayed. I leaned forward. The oar dipped again, scraping softly, cutting the stillness. And then he was gone. The boat floated empty. The ripples remained, bending and twisting as if the fisherman's shape still lingered. The water reflected nothing but fog and pale light. I stayed still, breathing slowly. The mist pressed against my skin, cold and damp. Every heartbeat echoed against the lake, loud and uneven. I reached out with my hands. The water was empty. No line, no figure, only ripples fading into the fog. The far shore seemed farther now. Trees leaned in silently, their shadows long, patient. The lake hummed faintly beneath me, a quiet rhythm that pressed against my chest. I let the oars rest. The ripples moved slowly, imitating him. Each one lingered a second too long, bending like a memory. The air smelled faintly of iron again, sharp, cold. Mist slid between my fingers, thick and wet. The silence was not empty. It watched. I breathed. The water remained still. The boat floated, alone, suspended in quiet, and somewhere beneath, the lake remembered him, shaping the ripples, shaping the silence. I did not move. I could not. I only watched the empty boat, the fading ripples, the shadow that had never really left. The pier stretched into the dark water. Mist clung to the wooden planks, slick and cold beneath my feet. Each step hummed faintly, vibrating through the boards and into my bones. The lake glowed faintly, pale and unnatural. Water lapped against the pier in slow, deliberate rhythms. It shimmered, faintly breathing, as if alive. A sound rose from beneath the waves, soft, stretched, hollow, like someone singing far away. The notes bent around me, curling into my chest, cold and sweet. I paused. The fog pressed close, brushing damp hair against my face. My boots felt heavy, cold, and the boards seemed to stretch beneath them. Reflections shimmered on the surface. I turned slowly, thinking I would see the empty pier behind me. But there, someone stood, no movement, no sound. Just a shape, pale and still, reflected in the water. I turned again. The dock was empty. Nothing but mist and wet boards, glistening faintly. The singing drifted again. Soft, hollow, curling into itself. It felt patient, as if the lake were breathing it directly into my ears. The water lapped closer, rising gently around the pier posts, cold and slick against my fingers when I brushed the edges. It smelled faintly of salt and decay, a metallic tang in the air. I stepped forward. The reflection remained. The shape mirrored me, tall, silent, wrong. I exhaled slowly. The fog swirled around my chest, tight and damp. The boards creaked faintly under my weight, each sound stretched, echoing. The singing shifted. Now lower, slower, almost murmuring. It wrapped around me, curling into the gaps between pier and water. I bent closer to the reflection. The figure did not move. Its edges shimmered in the pale light, unreal, like a memory trapped in water. A ripple passed through the lake. It shaped itself in the form of the reflection, bending, stretching. I shivered. The air smelled faintly of iron and wet wood. I wanted to step back, but my feet felt heavy, rooted to the planks. The fog pressed harder, clinging to my skin. The singing faded, yet the shape lingered. Its eyes, or the illusion of them, watched me from the water's surface. I leaned forward. The mist brushed my cheeks, cold and thick. The lake shimmered faintly beneath me, holding its secret. I exhaled again. The reflection wavered, stretching, dissolving, but never gone entirely. It seemed patient, waiting for me to notice, to stay. The boards creaked softly under my weight. The water lapped in unnatural rhythms. The fog shifted, curling around the posts like fingers. I stayed on the pier, breathing slowly, feeling the cold hum of the lake against my chest. Alone, yet not alone. The reflection vanished. The singing faded into the mist. The water glowed faintly, patiently, endlessly, and I remained, listening, feeling the pulse of the lake beneath me, a slow, quiet rhythm that would not let go. The driftwood lay half submerged. Mist curled around its edges, clinging to wet bark. The lake smelled faintly of cold stone and decaying wood. A figure stood on it, motionless, silent. At first I thought it was another fisherman. I blinked. It had no face, nothing but smooth, pale flesh where features should have been. The driftwood rocked gently under its weight. Soft ripples pressed against my boat, curling and folding. I could feel the hum of the water in my chest. It began to glide toward me. Slowly, impossibly smooth, like it floated just above the water. The fog wrapped around it, hiding the edges, bending the light. My breath caught. The air tasted damp and metallic, thick against my tongue. My boots pressed into the slick boards of my boat. I blinked again. It vanished. No figure. No presence. The driftwood continued to rock. Soft, deliberate movements, as if whatever had been there still lingered. The hum of the lake stretched in the silence. Cold water lapped against the hull. The fog pressed closer, sticky and wet, curling into my sleeves. I reached forward, fingertips brushing the air. Nothing. Only the ripple of driftwood swaying gently. Patiently, shadows lingered along the edges of the fog. Twisting, pale, almost human. I felt eyes on me that were not my own. I breathed slowly. The figure had gone, but its absence weighed heavy. The water reflected nothing but gray mist and pale light. The driftwood rocked again, soft, uneasy. It felt alive, remembering the shape that had moved across it. I sat still, listening to the lake hum beneath me. Every ripple echoed in my chest, cold and persistent. I could smell the faint tang of iron, wet moss, and something older. The air pressed against my skin, thick, patient, waiting. The fog clung, almost breathing, almost sentient. I did not move. I could not move. I only watched the driftwood sway, haunted by what had vanished. The reflection shimmered. Empty water, pale light, a shape that had been, and I felt the weight of it linger. The lake remained silent. The driftwood continued to rock softly, and the fog waited. Winter had claimed the lake. Ice stretched across its surface, pale and brittle, like glass pressed thin. The air smelled of cold stone and pine, sharp in my lungs. I stepped onto the frozen water. The boards of my boots creaked against the ice. It hummed faintly, alive beneath me. Responding to my weight, shadows moved beneath the surface. Pale faces, twisted and quiet, shifted just beneath the glassy layer. Eyes met mine, wide, dark, haunting. I held my breath. The ice vibrated under me, subtle but insistent. Each creak echoed in the fog, bouncing against the frozen trees. Their eyes followed, silent, patient, unblinking. I could feel their gaze pressing through the ice, cold as the lake itself. I stepped back slightly. The ice moaned under the shift, a long, low sound like the lake exhaling. The mist brushed my face, damp and biting. Fingers of fog curled across the surface. The pale faces moved slowly, reaching without breaking the ice. Their mouths parted faintly, but no sound came. I inhaled, tasting cold and iron on my tongue. The silence pressed against my ears, thick and heavy. Every heartbeat thumped loudly against it. I leaned closer to the ice. The frozen water reflected my own pale face. And beneath it, theirs. The breath of something pressed against mine. Not air, not mist, but a presence, patient and cold. I could feel it across the layer, brushing my cheeks, brushing my thoughts. I pulled back instinctively. The ice groaned again, louder this time, shifting under me. The faces tilted, following, reaching with eyes alone. The pale light of winter bent across the frozen lake. Shadows stretched unnaturally, clawing at the edges of the fog. The water beneath shimmered faintly, alive despite the ice. I stepped forward cautiously. Each movement echoed, bouncing across the frozen surface. The faces shifted, rising slightly, pressing closer, silent and patient. I could hear the ice creak like a living thing, soft, deep vibrations that settled into my chest. The fog curled around my feet, clinging, heavy, damp. I knelt slightly, fingertips brushing the frozen surface. Cold seeped through gloves, numbing skin. The faces tilted, meeting my gaze again, eyes hollow and endless. A shiver ran up my spine. Their breath, felt not heard, curled around me. It was patient, insistent, almost intimate. I stepped back, boots scraping the ice. The fog thickened, hiding the edges of the lake. The frozen water stretched, pale, endless, holding secrets beneath. I remained there, motionless, breathing slowly, feeling the hum of the ice beneath me. Alone, yet the eyes never left. The pale faces lingered beneath the glassy surface, silent, patient, and haunting. And I felt the weight of their gaze pressing through, steady as winter itself. I turned finally. The lake was empty of movement, but not of presence. I could still feel their breath, cold and still, brushing mine. The ice groaned faintly once more. The fog pressed tight around my shoulders, and I remained, watching, waiting. Fog lay thick across the shallow water. It pressed against my skin, damp and cold, curling into my hair. The air smelled of wet earth and something faintly metallic. A lantern floated ahead. Its light was pale, soft, yet unnervingly cold. It hummed. A high note stretched thin, vibrating through the mist and into my chest. I stepped forward, water lapping around my ankles. The soft hum tugged at me, patient and insistent. I could feel it pressing against my bones, urging me onward. Shadows twisted along the edges of the fog. They stretched and recoiled, long and thin like smoke curling across water. Each step I took sent ripples through the shallow lake, distorting the reflections. The lantern drifted just beyond reach. Its glow reflected off the ripples, bending and folding into strange shapes. The hum lingered, vibrating faintly on my tongue, soft and metallic. A whisper curled through the fog. My name. Soft, low, intimate. It brushed my ear, fading before I could respond. I followed. The water pressed against my legs, cold and clinging. The fog wrapped around me, heavy and patient. The shadows moved closer to the lantern. They twisted like smoke around the pale light, folding into themselves. The shapes were just beyond naming, just beyond sight. I reached for the lantern. The hum pulsed again, higher, sharper, almost singing. The mist brushed my fingertips, cool and wet, and then it vanished. No lantern, no light, only the lingering note, stretching thin and high, curling through the fog. I stopped. The shallow water reflected nothing but pale gray. Ripples trembled softly around me, fading slowly. The whisper returned, faint, curling around my chest. I shivered, tasting cold iron in the air. The fog pressed against my skin, patient, unyielding. I exhaled slowly. The hum lingered just beneath the surface of hearing, soft, vibrating, distant. Shadows stretched and recoiled across the shallow water, still but restless. I stood alone. The lantern gone, leaving only memory and echo. The fog folded around me like fingers, soft, damp, patient. The note faded finally. The water rippled faintly, cold, still, and I felt the pull of the lake, silent, waiting. I remained there, alone, listening, feeling the hum of what had been. The fog pressed close, carrying its breath, its memory, its song. Fog rolled over the wooden pier, thick, curling, moving like smoke across the boards. It pressed against my chest, damp and cold. The planks shifted beneath me. Not violently, but subtly, like the pier was alive. Each step hummed faintly, vibrating into my bones. Footprints formed behind me. Deep, wet impressions pressed into the wood. I turned slowly. No one was there, the mist wrapped around my shoulders. I could taste damp wood and cold iron in the air. Every breath felt heavy, curling in my lungs. Rustling circled the pier. Soft, careful, deliberate. The sound moved with the fog, unseen, patient. I froze. The end of the pier disappeared into gray. Nothing but mist and shadow stretched before me. I exhaled slowly. The air smelled faintly of moss and decay. The fog pressed closer, almost sentient, curling against my skin. Each footstep echoed unnaturally. The planks beneath me groaned, shifting, remembering. I could feel the hum of the pier beneath my boots. The footprints behind me did not fade. They remained deep and cold. I could almost feel the weight of someone walking just behind my back. I tried to move forward. The fog swirled thicker, pressing, bending the light. Shadows stretched and recoiled across the boards, too long, too thin. I stopped. The rustling continued, circling closer, patient. The pier seemed endless, suspended in gray, endless and waiting. My hands pressed against the damp railing. Cold seeped into my fingers. The mist clung, heavy and wet, brushing against my cheeks. Footsteps echoed again behind me. Soft, deliberate, unrelenting. I could not turn. I could not move. The pier hummed faintly beneath my boots. The fog swirled, curling into my sleeves, my hair. Each breath trembled, mingling with the silence. I exhaled slowly. The footprints remained, haunting, unbroken. The rustling circled still, patient, impossible. I stayed still. The mist pressed tight, cold, watching. The pier shifted faintly beneath me, alive, remembering, endless. The fog thickened. Shadows clung to the edges, reaching, stretching. I could see nothing but gray and cold wood, and yet I felt everything. I remained. Alone, but not alone. The pier waited. Night pressed over the lake. Mist hung low, curling around my shoulders, damp and cold. The air smelled faintly of wet earth and iron. I heard it first, a scraping across the water. Slow, deliberate, almost rhythmic. I turned. Nothing moved. No boat. No shadow. The scraping repeated. Closer now, pressing across the still surface. It hummed faintly beneath the rhythm, subtle and low. Ripples stretched outward. Soft, silent, bending unnaturally. They approached in a slow, human-like pattern, deliberate and patient. I stepped forward. The mist pressed into my skin, thick, curling between my fingers. The scrape came again, closer. I peered across the lake. Only gray water, reflecting pale moonlight. No boat, no oar, only ripples moving toward me. My chest tightened. The air tasted metallic, cold against my tongue. The hum beneath the scrape pressed into my ribs. I froze. The ripples drew nearer, undisturbed by wind or current. Each wave bent, stretched, as if carrying weight unseen. The scraping came again. Slower now, deliberate, patient. I could feel the rhythm in my bones. Shadows shifted along the far shore. Trees leaned in, still watching. The fog curled against my boots, cold and damp. I tried to breathe slowly. The scraping paused. The ripples hovered just beyond reach, bending unnaturally in the moonlight. I stepped backward. The mist followed, clinging to my sleeves and hair. Every step echoed faintly, unnaturally, against the silent lake. The scrape resumed. Closer now, scraping across nothing, pressing through the quiet. Ripples twisted toward me, patient, human in their rhythm. I could see my own reflection tremble. The water shimmered with movement, though the lake remained empty. Eyes pressed against my chest, heavy, waiting. I exhaled slowly. The scraping drifted farther, then closer again. The ripples followed, bending and folding into each other like shadows. I stood still, alone, but the lake whispered against my skin. The oar, the ripples, the rhythm, all unseen, all patient. The mist curled tighter. The scraping stretched across the water, soft and deliberate. The lake waited. I listened. The ripples moved like fingers across the surface, and I remained, quiet, watching, breathing. The scraping faded slowly. The ripples settled, folding into stillness. The night pressed in, cold and endless, and I felt it, presence beneath the water, patient, silent, waiting. The lake lay still. Fog curled over the surface, thick and pale, brushing my cheeks. The air smelled of wet earth and cold stone. I peered into the water. My reflection shimmered, soft and wavering like candlelight over glass. Then it moved. Not with me. Independently, subtly, a breath behind my own. The fog mirrored it, curling into shapes that mimicked my limbs. I leaned closer. The water was cold, biting my fingertips through gloves. The reflection stretched, twisting, grinning faintly where I did not. I tried to step back. The fog thickened, curling around my ankles, pulling softly. The water seemed to reach, tugging at my boots, wet and patient. Shadows twisted across the lake's surface, shapes of fog bent toward me, bending light, bending space. They followed the reflection, leaning closer, patient. My chest tightened. The air was damp, thick, pressing into my lungs. Each exhale trembled in the stillness. I watched my reflection again. It mirrored nothing. It moved on its own, stretching fingers where mine remained still. The fog curled more tightly. Around my arms, my hair, my face, it smelled of moss and cold water, metallic and sharp. I tried to look away, but the reflection pulled my gaze, soft, insistent, patient. It reached for me with shadows folded in its edges. I stepped back. The lake pulled gently at my boots, water brushing my shins. Each movement echoed, stretched, as if the fog itself remembered my steps. The shapes in the mist bent further. They twisted, becoming almost human, almost mine. They mirrored my posture, my breathing, my hesitation. I exhaled slowly, shivering. The reflection tilted its head, silent and patient. The fog pressed closer, curling into my sleeves, cold and damp. I tried to step back again. The water rose faintly around my ankles, pressing, patient. The reflection reached, shadowed fog folding into itself. I could hear the lake hum, subtle, low, vibrating in my chest. The fog curled tighter, soft and deliberate, almost breathing. I froze. The reflection lingered, moving independently, patient, insistent. The mist wrapped around me, pressing cold against my skin. I remained still, watching the shapes twist, watching the reflections stretch beyond my own form. The lake tugged gently at my feet, patient and quiet. The fog softened slightly. The reflection shimmered, fading into pale ripples. The water stilled, holding its secrets beneath. I stepped back fully. The lake lay still, but the fog lingered, and I could still feel the pull, soft, quiet, endless. The pier groaned beneath my boots. Even where the boards felt solid, subtle vibrations hummed into my feet. The air smelled of wet wood and salt, sharp and heavy. Each step echoed unnaturally. Soft, elongated, stretching across the empty water. The fog curled low, pressing around my ankles and knees. Shadows stretched from the pilings, long, thin, bending in impossible ways. They clung to the water, reaching, patient, unmoving. I paused. The lake beneath whispered faintly, soft, almost human, curling against the wooden boards. The pier shivered lightly underfoot. I could feel the hum in my chest, low, insistent. Mist clung to my hair, damp and biting. A ripple passed beneath a piling. It twisted unnaturally, as though the water remembered shapes that had been. I inhaled slowly, tasting cold iron and wet moss. The shadows shifted slightly, leaning toward me, stretching longer, folding into the fog. The whispering beneath the water repeated, patient, distant, impossible to ignore. I stepped forward. The boards groaned beneath me, soft but steady. Every echo folded into the fog, stretching into the silence. My reflection shimmered faintly in the water. It was pale, distorted, as if the pier itself had bent the light. I could feel eyes beneath the surface, patient, waiting. The whispering grew subtly. It licked at the edges of my ears, soft, curling, insistent. The pier shifted under each careful step I took. Shadows from the pilings twisted, folding into the boards. They seemed to breathe, to stretch, to follow the rhythm of my heartbeat. The mist wrapped around my boots, my sleeves damp and slow. I stopped mid-step. The whispering beneath the water paused. The pier hummed faintly, alive beneath my feet. I exhaled slowly. The fog pressed in closer, heavy, curling, patient. The shadows remained, long and thin, anchored to the pilings but bending toward me. I stepped again. The boards groaned beneath me, louder this time, hollow and deep. The lake whispered beneath, curling against the pier, pressing cold and wet. Every step echoed. Every breath trembled in the damp air. The fog clung, the shadows stretched, the whispers lingered. I could feel the weight of the pier beneath me. Alive, patient, remembering every footstep I had taken. And beneath it, the water hummed softly, carrying voices I could not name. I remained still, alone, yet surrounded. The pier groaned, the fog pressed, the whispers breathed beneath. The shadows stayed stretched along the pilings. The water held its secrets, and I listened, quiet, patient, suspended in the hollow. Fog hugged the far shore. The air smelled of wet earth and cold metal. A chill pressed into my chest, slow, steady. I glimpsed him first, a pale figure still casting a line into the water. His movements were smooth, deliberate, unnaturally calm. The line never landed. It hovered, taut and impossible. The ripples spread, unnervingly human in rhythm. I stepped closer. The damp ground pressed against my boots, soft and cold. The fog curled around my ankles, curling, patient. His gaze, it pierced me through the mist, direct, unblinking. I could feel it in my chest, pressing, heavy and waiting. I blinked. The figure vanished. No ripple, no shadow, but the water remembered. The ripples lingered, soft and deliberate. They stretched, twisted, curling in shapes that felt alive. I could feel the lake hum beneath my boots. The fog pressed closer, damp and patient, curling into my sleeves. The air smelled of cold iron and wet wood. I exhaled slowly. The silence stretched, thick, heavy. Even the wind held its breath. The ripples shifted again. They moved toward me, slow, deliberate, like fingers across the water. I stayed still. The shore seemed empty. But the presence remained, patient, waiting. The lake whispered beneath the fog, low and soft. I stepped back. The water pressed at my ankles, damp and cold. The ripples lingered, stretching farther than they should. I could feel his gaze. Even absent, it pressed into my chest, insistent, patient. The mist curled into my hair, cold, unyielding. The line hung suspended in the air, invisible, remembered. Each ripple traced its memory across the surface. The lake waited. I remained still, alone, yet not alone. The fog pressed, the water hummed, the ripples lingered. I exhaled slowly. The figure did not return. Only the memory of him, soft, pale, patient. The lake whispered. The fog folded around my boots, and I listened, still, waiting, pressing against the silence. Moonlight spilled across the forest. Fog clung to the trees, curling pale and soft, brushing my cheeks. The air smelled damp and earthy, sharp with pine. Shapes drifted through the mist. Some too large, stretching beyond reason. Some too thin, like shadows forgotten by the light. I stepped quietly. The ground was soft, cold, holding the press of my boots. The mist pressed against my sleeves, damp and patient. The forest seemed to breathe. Leaves shivered in the stillness, stretching, folding. The fog wrapped around the trunks, moving like slow fingers. I paused. A thin shadow passed before my eyes, long, bending unnaturally. It lingered, patient, watching, fading into the mist. The shapes drifted closer. They moved without sound, gliding, floating. The air hummed faintly, low, pressing into my chest. I felt the forest watching. Every tree, every branch seemed alive. The fog pressed against my boots, damp, curling, insistent. A larger shape rose from the mist. It leaned impossibly, twisting, folding beyond the edge of sight. I shivered. The air tasted metallic and cold. The pale light bent against the fog. Every shadow stretched, rippled, became uncertain. Soft rustling circled just beyond sight, patient and deliberate. I breathed slowly. The mist swirled, brushing my hair, my sleeves, soft and damp. The forest inhaled with me, slow, alive. The shapes twisted again. Some stretched into the trees, some hovered above the ground. They moved like memories, familiar and wrong. I stepped carefully. The earth pressed softly beneath me. The fog clung, curling around my boots and ankles, holding me. I could feel the hum in my chest, soft, steady, like the forest itself was breathing. The shapes glimmered in the pale moonlight, insistent, patient. I stopped. The mist thickened, folding around me. Shapes lingered at the edges, too large, too thin, waiting. The forest whispered faintly. Leaves shivered against each other. Every shadow bent, stretched, and pressed closer. I exhaled slowly. The moonlight glowed against the fog, soft and cold. The shapes shifted, drifting farther, yet never leaving. I remained still. The forest breathed, watching, patient. The fog curled into my sleeves. The shapes drifted. The silence hummed. And I waited quietly under the moonlit mist. Fog hung low over the lake. The water was black and smooth, pressing against the dock with a soft, steady hum. The air smelled of wet wood and cold metal. I saw it then. A boat floating perfectly still, no oar, no passenger. It drifted quietly, small ripples curling outward. I stepped closer. The mist brushed my face, damp, soft, curling around my sleeves. The lake smelled faintly of moss and old water. The boat rocked slightly. Nothing inside. No movement, no wind, only the gentle tilt of the hull. Ripples formed around it. Deliberate, slow, curling like symbols I could not read. The water hummed beneath the fog, low and steady. I reached the edge of the dock. The mist clung to my boots, cold and patient. Each breath tasted of damp wood and iron. The boat shifted again. Slightly, impossibly, as if aware of me. The ripples followed, curling in patterns, deliberate, patient. I leaned closer. The water pressed against my fingers, cool, slick, alive. The fog pressed into my hair, damp and soft. I stepped carefully. The dock groaned faintly, stretching under my weight. The ripples moved with a rhythm that felt deliberate. The boat floated, silent, waiting. No shadow moved inside it, yet the water carried presence. The lake hummed, low and steady, vibrating through the boards beneath my boots. I held my breath. The fog wrapped around my ankles, curling, insistent. The boat tilted slightly toward me as if acknowledging my presence. The ripples continued. Patterns stretched across the surface, slow and deliberate. Each wave pressed into my chest, patient, unnerving. I stepped back. The mist shifted around me, curling over the dock. The boat remained still, patient, silent, waiting. I could feel it watching. Though empty, it carried a presence, calm and insistent. The fog pressed close, damp, curling, alive. I stayed motionless. The water hummed beneath me. Ripples continued to fold, deliberate, patient, curling through the mist. The boat floated, still silent, untouched. And I felt the lake breathe around it, waiting, patient, endless. Fog lay thick over the lake. The air was damp, cold, smelling faintly of rot and wet wood. Every breath pressed heavy in my chest. I saw it then, an old dock appearing where none had been before. Its boards were dark, worn, splintering underfoot. I stepped carefully. The wood groaned beneath my weight, soft, alive. The fog curled around my ankles, damp and patient. Shadows flickered, long, thin shapes stretching across the dock, then vanishing. I could feel them moving with the fog, brushing the edges of my sight. Something followed my steps. No shape, no form, only presence. The dock hummed beneath my boots, the water pressing against the pilings. I breathed slowly. The air tasted of wet earth and cold stone. The mist wrapped around my sleeves, curling, insistent. Each board splintered slightly underfoot. Tiny cracks whispered beneath the weight of my steps. The shadows flickered again, closer, patient. I paused. The fog pressed thick around my hair, damp, curling, alive. The dock stretched ahead, endless, unwelcoming. The unseen presence moved with me. Every step I took, every breath I exhaled, it shifted in rhythm. The water hummed faintly beneath the pilings, low, constant. I felt the dock sway slightly. Not from wind, not from my steps. Something unseen held it, patient, deliberate. I leaned closer to the edge. The fog pressed into my face, cool, damp, tasting faintly of moss. Shadows twisted at the edges, curling like fingers through the mist. I exhaled slowly. The dock stretched ahead, its end obscured by fog. Every sound echoed, soft, deliberate, unnerving. The presence moved again, closer, patient, beneath the fog, behind the wood. I felt it brush against my back, soft, cold, impossible. I stepped forward. Each splintered board groaned beneath me, echoing into the mist. The shadows flickered with every motion, deliberate, watching. The dock seemed endless. Fog pressed into every corner, curling around pilings and rails. The unseen presence followed, patient, pressing, breathing with me. I froze. The mist curled over my boots, damp and insistent. The dock groaned again, soft and deliberate, like a warning. I exhaled slowly. Shadows twisted in the fog, flickering, never fully seen. The water hummed beneath the pilings, patient, low, alive. I remained still. The dock stretched endlessly. The fog pressed close. And I felt the unseen presence waiting, patient, deliberate, never leaving. Fog settled over the lake like a thin sheet of silk. The air was cold, damp, tasting faintly of mud and pine. Every breath pressed heavy in my chest. The water hummed, soft, low notes, stretched and trembling. They pulled at me, gentle, insistent. I stepped closer. The mist clung to my boots, curling upward, damp against my skin. The lake smelled faintly of decay and wet wood. My reflection wavered. Each note stretched it, twisting my face in the water. I blinked and it shifted again, never still. I wanted to turn back. The pull was soft, almost gentle, but impossible to resist. The fog pressed around my sleeves, damp and patient. Ripples moved beneath the hum, slow, deliberate curling toward me. The surface reflected pale light, ghostly and soft. I leaned closer. The water shimmered, alive with vibration. Each note folded into my chest, pressing, patient, insistent. The reflection grew stranger. Eyes lingered longer than they should. Mouths stretched faintly, silent, waiting. I took a step forward. The hum pressed into my bones, low and steady. The fog twisted around me, carrying the scent of wet pine and cold earth. The ripples spiraled outward. Slow patterns, deliberate, curling through the fog. Each vibration pulled me closer, impossible to resist. I breathed slowly. The lake seemed to breathe with me, rising, falling, patient. The notes pressed against my ears, soft, stretched, lingering. I blinked. My reflection no longer matched me. It leaned, it stretched, it waited. I wanted to look away. The hum followed, soft, insistent, pulling my eyes back to the surface. The fog pressed into my hair, damp, curling, alive. Ripples moved beneath me. Shadows shifted in the water, never forming fully. I felt them reach, patient, deliberate, quiet. I stepped forward. The hum vibrated through my chest. The fog pressed against my arms, cold and damp, curling like fingers. My reflection trembled. Each note stretched it further, soft, unnatural. Eyes locked with mine, patient, unblinking. I could not turn back. The water hummed, slow, deliberate, pulling me forward. The lake pressed against my ankles, damp, patient, alive. I exhaled slowly. The fog wrapped tight around my shoulders. Ripples formed under the surface, patterns I could not read. I stayed still. The hum lingered, soft, stretching. My reflection waited, patient, impossible, and I could not move away. The lake stretched dark beneath the night sky. Fog hovered low, curling over the water like smoke. The air was damp, smelling faintly of moss and cold stone. I saw him then. A fisherman, motionless on the far shore. No sway in his stance, no ripple of movement. The water pressed softly against the bank. Every breath I drew felt heavier, thick with cold mist. I sensed him before I heard him, or rather I sensed the absence of sound. Each blink brought a new ripple. Small waves rolled toward me, deliberate, patient. They mirrored the subtle shift of the wind, though the air was still. He stood perfectly. Head tilted slightly as if listening to the lake. I could feel his awareness pressing across the water. I stepped forward. The wet earth squished beneath my boots, damp and cold. The fog coiled around my legs, moving like silent fingers. The lake shifted again. Ripples danced, responding to my every blink. The pale light of the moon caught them, glinting faintly, unnervingly precise. His outline remained still. The oar rested at his side, untouched, silent. No heartbeat, no hum of life. I swallowed. The mist pressed against my face, smelling faintly of decayed wood and water. My breath left a soft echo, swallowed almost immediately by the fog. Ripples stretched across the surface. Each blink made them grow, like a pulse I could feel in my chest. I wanted to look away. I could not. He did not move. The faint line of his shoulders was rigid, deliberate. Eyes I could not see seemed to pierce the dark, touch me through the distance. I took another step. Soft mud gave beneath my weight, cold and unyielding. The fog clung to my sleeves, damp and whispering. The lake responded. Ripples curved toward me, curling slowly like hands reaching, careful, patient. The sound of water folding against water pressed in my ears. He breathed, or the air around him did. There was no sound, yet a pressure, subtle, almost living, radiated from the shore. I felt it brush my skin, cold, waiting. I froze. The fog tightened around my shoulders, a soft, wet embrace. Ripples swirled with each heartbeat, following, guiding. I wanted to call out. My voice died before it left my throat, swallowed by the mist. He remained perfectly still, yet undeniably aware. I stepped back. The earth squished softly, leaving no print to mark my retreat. The lake mirrored me perfectly, every movement accounted for. The moonlight skimmed the water. Ripples glimmered faintly, like stretched threads of silver. They pulsed with him, patient, silent, impossible to ignore. I exhaled slowly. The moonlight glowed against the fog, soft and cold. The shapes shifted, drifting farther, yet never leaving. I remained still. The forest breathed, watching, patient. The fog curled into my sleeves. The shapes drifted. The silence hummed. And I waited quietly under the moonlit mist. Fog hung low over the lake. The water was black and smooth, pressing against the dock with a soft, steady hum. The air smelled of wet wood and cold metal. I saw it then. A boat floating perfectly still, no oar, no passenger. It drifted quietly, small ripples curling outward. I stepped closer. The mist brushed my face, damp, soft, curling around my sleeves. The lake smelled faintly of moss and old water. The boat rocked slightly. Nothing inside. No movement, no wind, only the gentle tilt of the hull. Ripples formed around it. Deliberate, slow, curling like symbols I could not read. The water hummed beneath the fog, low and steady. I reached the edge of the dock. The mist clung to my boots, cold and patient. Each breath tasted of damp wood and iron. The boat shifted again, slightly, impossibly, as if aware of me. The ripples followed, curling in patterns, deliberate, patient. I leaned closer. The water pressed against my fingers, cool, slick, alive. The fog pressed into my hair, damp and soft. I stepped carefully. The dock groaned faintly, stretching under my weight. The ripples moved with a rhythm that felt deliberate. The boat floated, silent, waiting. No shadow moved inside it, yet the water carried presence. The lake hummed, low and steady, vibrating through the boards beneath my boots. I held my breath. The fog wrapped around my ankles, curling, insistent. The boat tilted slightly toward me as if acknowledging my presence. The ripples continued. Patterns stretched across the surface, slow and deliberate. Each wave pressed into my chest, patient, unnerving. I stepped back. The mist shifted around me, curling over the dock. The boat remained still, patient, silent, waiting. I could feel it watching. Though empty, it carried a presence, calm and insistent. The fog pressed close, damp, curling, alive. I stayed motionless. The water hummed beneath me. Ripples continued to fold, deliberate, patient, curling through the mist. The boat floated, still silent, untouched. And I felt the lake breathe around it, waiting, patient, endless. Fog lay thick over the lake. The air was damp, cold, smelling faintly of rot and wet wood. Every breath pressed heavy in my chest. I saw it then, an old dock appearing where none had been before. Its boards were dark, worn, splintering underfoot. I stepped carefully. The wood groaned beneath my weight, soft, alive. The fog curled around my ankles, damp and patient. Shadows flickered, long, thin shapes stretching across the dock, then vanishing. I could feel them moving with the fog, brushing the edges of my sight. Something followed my steps. No shape, no form, only presence. The dock hummed beneath my boots, the water pressing against the pilings. I breathed slowly. The air tasted of wet earth and cold stone. The mist wrapped around my sleeves, curling, insistent. Each board splintered slightly underfoot. Tiny cracks whispered beneath the weight of my steps. The shadows flickered again, closer, patient. I paused. The fog pressed thick around my hair, damp, curling, alive. The dock stretched ahead, endless, unwelcoming. The unseen presence moved with me. Every step I took, every breath I exhaled, it shifted in rhythm. The water hummed faintly beneath the pilings, low, constant. I felt the dock sway slightly. Not from wind, not from my steps. Something unseen held it, patient, deliberate. I leaned closer to the edge. The fog pressed into my face, cool, damp, tasting faintly of moss. Shadows twisted at the edges, curling like fingers through the mist. I exhaled slowly. The dock stretched ahead, its end obscured by fog. Every sound echoed, soft, deliberate, unnerving. The presence moved again, closer, patient, beneath the fog, behind the wood. I felt it brush against my back, soft, cold, impossible. I stepped forward. Each splintered board groaned beneath me, echoing into the mist. The shadows flickered with every motion, deliberate, watching. The dock seemed endless. Fog pressed into every corner, curling around pilings and rails. The unseen presence followed, patient, pressing, breathing with me. I froze. The mist curled over my boots, damp and insistent. The dock groaned again, soft and deliberate, like a warning. I exhaled slowly. Shadows twisted in the fog, flickering, never fully seen. The water hummed beneath the pilings, patient, low, alive. I remained still. The dock stretched endlessly. The fog pressed close. And I felt the unseen presence waiting, patient, deliberate, never leaving. Fog settled over the lake like a thin sheet of silk. The air was cold, damp, tasting faintly of mud and pine. Every breath pressed heavy in my chest. The water hummed, soft, low notes, stretched and trembling. They pulled at me, gentle, insistent. I stepped closer. The mist clung to my boots, curling upward, damp against my skin. The lake smelled faintly of decay and wet wood. My reflection wavered. Each note stretched it, twisting my face in the water. I blinked and it shifted again, never still. I wanted to turn back. The pull was soft, almost gentle, but impossible to resist. The fog pressed around my sleeves, damp and patient. Ripples moved beneath the hum, slow, deliberate curling toward me. The surface reflected pale light, ghostly and soft. I leaned closer. The water shimmered, alive with vibration. Each note folded into my chest, pressing, patient, insistent. The reflection grew stranger. Eyes lingered longer than they should. Mouths stretched faintly, silent, waiting. I took a step forward. The hum pressed into my bones, low and steady. The fog twisted around me, carrying the scent of wet pine and cold earth. The ripples spiraled outward. Slow patterns, deliberate, curling through the fog. Each vibration pulled me closer, impossible to resist. I breathed slowly. The lake seemed to breathe with me, rising, falling, patient. The notes pressed against my ears, soft, stretched, lingering. I blinked. My reflection no longer matched me. It leaned, it stretched, it waited. I wanted to look away. The hum followed, soft, insistent, pulling my eyes back to the surface. The fog pressed into my hair, damp, curling, alive. Ripples moved beneath me. Shadows shifted in the water, never forming fully. I felt them reach, patient, deliberate, quiet. I stepped forward. The hum vibrated through my chest. The fog pressed against my arms, cold and damp, curling like fingers. My reflection trembled. Each note stretched it further, soft, unnatural. Eyes locked with mine, patient, unblinking. I could not turn back. The water hummed, slow, deliberate, pulling me forward. The lake pressed against my ankles, damp, patient, alive. I exhaled slowly. The fog wrapped tight around my shoulders. Ripples formed under the surface, patterns I could not read. I stayed still. The hum lingered, soft, stretching. My reflection waited, patient, impossible, and I could not move away. The lake stretched dark beneath the night sky. Fog hovered low, curling over the water like smoke. The air was damp, smelling faintly of moss and cold stone. I saw him then. A fisherman, motionless on the far shore. No sway in his stance, no ripple of movement. The water pressed softly against the bank. Every breath I drew felt heavier, thick with cold mist. I sensed him before I heard him, or rather I sensed the absence of sound. Each blink brought a new ripple. Small waves rolled toward me, deliberate, patient. They mirrored the subtle shift of the wind, though the air was still. He stood perfectly. Head tilted slightly as if listening to the lake. I could feel his awareness pressing across the water. I stepped forward. The wet earth squished beneath my boots, damp and cold. The fog coiled around my legs, moving like silent fingers. The lake shifted again. Ripples danced, responding to my every blink. The pale light of the moon caught them, glinting faintly, unnervingly precise. His outline remained still. The oar rested at his side, untouched, silent. No heartbeat, no hum of life. I swallowed. The mist pressed against my face, smelling faintly of decayed wood and water. My breath left a soft echo, swallowed almost immediately by the fog. Ripples stretched across the surface. Each blink made them grow, like a pulse I could feel in my chest. I wanted to look away. I could not. He did not move. The faint line of his shoulders was rigid, deliberate. Eyes I could not see seemed to pierce the dark, touch me through the distance. I took another step. Soft mud gave beneath my weight, cold and unyielding. The fog clung to my sleeves, damp and whispering. The lake responded. Ripples curved toward me, curling slowly like hands reaching, careful, patient. The sound of water folding against water pressed in my ears. He breathed, or the air around him did. There was no sound, yet a pressure, subtle, almost living, radiated from the shore. I felt it brush my skin, cold, waiting. I froze. The fog tightened around my shoulders, a soft, wet embrace. Ripples swirled with each heartbeat, following, guiding. I wanted to call out. My voice died before it left my throat, swallowed by the mist. He remained, perfectly still, yet undeniably aware. I stepped back. The earth squished softly, leaving no print to mark my retreat. The lake mirrored me perfectly, every movement accounted for. The moonlight skimmed the water. Ripples glimmered faintly, like stretched threads of silver. They pulsed with him, patient, silent, impossible to ignore. I moved again, slow, deliberate, careful not to startle what followed. The fog rippled around me like water over stones. Each step left an imprint in mist and mud, but nothing followed, or maybe it did, too subtle to notice. I looked toward the lake. Its surface was gray, still, and the fog blurred every detail. Shapes hovered just beneath the edges, vanishing when I tried to see clearly. I whispered my own name. It sounded wrong, hollow, swallowed by fog. The mist shifted as if listening. I stopped. Silence pressed down, thick and humid. The fog moved gently against my skin, brushing my arms, tracing my back. I felt it again. Eyes, watching me from everywhere and nowhere. I could not see them, but I knew they were patient, waiting. I blinked. Shapes vanished. The fog settled back, gray and unbroken. I breathed slowly. Each inhale tasted damp, cold, and metallic. Each exhale scattered mist at my feet, curling like fingers. I moved away, cautious, almost dragging my boots through the mud. The fog followed, curling around each step, alive and patient. I could hear my own heartbeat, loud and distant in the wet silence. The shapes appeared one last time, pale, twisting, fading when I looked directly. I blinked and they were gone. The fog hung thick, silent, and waiting. I could feel its eyes on me, gentle yet unyielding. I took another step, then another, moving slowly into the night. The mist whispered around me. I smelled damp earth, cold water, and something just beyond recognition, and I knew I was being watched. The lake lay still beneath a pale, cold sky. Its surface was glass, smooth and unbroken. The air smelled faintly of damp wood and something older, deeper. I stepped closer. Footprints pressed into wet sand, alone and uneven. Each one echoed softly, swallowed by the silence. I looked down. The water reflected me, but not only me. Faces stared back, not mine. Pale, blurred, and wrong. I blinked. They vanished. The water rippled, calm again. I took a shallow breath. It tasted of mist and cold stone, and still I felt them, eyes, just beyond clarity, following each move. I wanted to look away, but the mirror called, soft and insistent. I knelt at the shore. Fingers skimmed the water, wet and icy. Ripples distorted their faces, stretching them thin. They stared still. Even when I blinked, they lingered. A weight pressed into my chest. The wind rustled over reeds. It whispered faintly, brushing hair and skin. And I felt it, another presence hovering, patient. I looked into the water again. Some faces closer now, almost tangible. I could see eyes, hollow, reflecting nothing but me. My hands trembled. Cold mist rolled over my wrists, curling between my fingers. The lake seemed to breathe beneath my touch. I tried to speak. No sound came. Only silence, thick and unbroken, pressing around me. The faces shifted. Not in the water, beneath it as if the glass were a thin veil. Every blink erased them. Every blink returned the feeling. I stood slowly. Feet sank slightly into soft mud. The reflection followed, warped, endless, a weight of regret. The pale light from the sky trembled on the surface. Each movement stretched shadows, elongated, thin. I shivered, feeling eyes against the back of my neck. A single ripple moved across the glass. Faces trembled, almost lost, then fixed again. I wanted to run, but the cold, silent pull rooted me in place. I leaned closer. The water was still and deep. I could smell damp earth, water, and the faint metallic scent of something else. Blinking didn't help. The faces, though gone, lingered in my mind. Presence, heavier than water, heavier than air. I pulled back. Ripples spread outward, erasing traces of them. But the emptiness that remained pressed on me, watching, patient. I breathed slowly. Each inhale tasted of frost and shadow. Each exhale stirred only pale mist above the surface. The lake reflected nothing but itself, and yet I knew. I was not alone. I stepped away. Mud clung to my boots, cold and heavy. Fog rolled across the shore, thick and slow, curling around me. Every blink, every glance back reminded me. Eyes once seen never leave entirely. The mirror of water, smooth and silver, waits quietly. I walked into the fog. The lake's surface remained still, but in its silence I could feel them, waiting, the cold wrapped around me. The mist brushed skin and hair, and still they were there. Dawn pressed pale light across the lake. Mist hung low, curling over still water like slow smoke. The air smelled of wet earth, pine, and something older, waiting. I stepped back from the shore. Feet sank slightly in soft mud. The cold clung to boots and ankles, reluctant to let go. The lake stretched wide and silent. A faint hum rose from the depths, soft and steady. I could feel it in my chest, a pulse that matched my own. I paused. The water rippled gently, almost imperceptibly. slow and deliberate. I watched. Mist curled around it, shifting like fingers reaching upward. It beckoned without sound. Shadows moved across the surface. Not dark, not light, something in between, stretching thin and trembling. I felt the weight of their gaze, patient and knowing. I drew a breath. It tasted of cold fog and pine needles. I wanted to turn, but my body lingered rooted. The ripple widened. A line of silver spread across the lake, leaving nothing but clarity behind. The mist followed, curling and whispering around it. I blinked. For a moment, the lake seemed empty, silent. Then I felt it. The memory of every motion, every shadow, every echo I had left behind. I realized the lake never forgets. It holds each ripple, each reflection, each step. Patient, eternal, waiting for acknowledgement. I stepped backward. Mud clung to my boots. Cold seeped through socks and skin, gentle but insistent. The mist shifted. It brushed against my face, soft as breath. And I understood, not with words, but in a quiet knowing. Every glance over the water showed me something familiar. The stillness, the faint echoes, the subtle movements of unseen shapes. All part of the lake and all part of me now. I inhaled slowly. The fog wrapped around shoulders and arms. The hum in my chest harmonized with the lake's own slow pulse. The ripple slowed. It lingered at the center, a perfect circle. Then it dissolved. Mist and water returned to stillness. I turned fully, facing away. Feet pressed into mud, leaving only impressions that would fade with time. Yet the memory remained, subtle, pressing softly into my mind. I walked. Branches brushed my hair, the scent of wet wood rising, silence pressed against ears and skin. I carried it all with me, the calm, the weight, the endless quiet. Every step felt deliberate. The lake behind me reflected nothing but pale light and fog. But I knew it remembered. I knew it waited. A soft wind lifted from the water. It whispered around my coat, over my hair, across my hands. I shivered, not from cold, but from understanding. The last ripple lingered in memory, more than in sight. I would feel it in my chest, in the quiet spaces of breath, in the hum of every morning. The lake would never forget. I exhaled slowly. Mist clung to boots, arms, and hair one final time, and then I left it behind, not with fear, not with regret, but with a gentle, silent acceptance. The water remained still. Mist curled and retreated, pale and patient. The lake waited, and I walked on, carrying its silence with me.